New this morning, text messages obtained by CNN reveal that a key figure in the plot to overturn the 2020 election briefed White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows about his attempts to gain access to voting machines in battleground states. Joining me now, CNN national security reporter Zachary Cohen. Zach, I mean, this shows the president's chief of staff knew about these efforts.
Yeah, Jim, it's really remarkable. These are texts between Meadows and this guy named Phil Waldron. Waldron was really behind some of the most outlandish proposals for overturning the election, and they really focused on getting access to voting machines in particular, right? And he was really hung up on this idea that foreign countries, foreign adversaries had hacked into voting machines through outlandish ways.
Based on nothing.
Based on nothing. Satellites, thermostats, and you know, he was on a mission to prove it. And so this shows that Mark Meadows was talking to Phil Waldron, a direct line to Trump's chief of staff, at a time when Trump's closest allies were really hunting and really urgently hunting for proof, any proof or evidence of voter fraud that they never really did turn up. So I think the timing of this is really important. It's interesting to note that what they're talking about here is not necessarily illegal, but what it is it shows just the sense of urgency from the Trump people to really prove the conspiracies that were out there.
How did Meadows respond when he was made aware of this?
In both instances, he responds in one word. But so in the first example, they're talking about an effort to get voting machine access in Arizona, and a judge says, no, we're not going to let that happen. And Waldron's informing Meadows about this. But when he does, Meadows just says one thing. He says, pathetic.
So he wasn't satisfied with the efforts.
He clearly makes his feelings
Now, there is a criminal investigation at both the state and federal level, so investigations, I should say, into obtaining voting machines potentially illegally. So that is a criminal investigation, though.
Yeah, Jim, look, there's state and federal investigations, criminal investigations involving incidents in 3 different states, right? And it's not clear, and there's no evidence that it's directly related to what Waldron is talking to Meadows about in these text messages. But it's interesting because several of the individuals who are targets in these criminal investigations are also associates of Waldron and have worked with him in the past. So those investigations have to play out, but the overlap there is notable.
Investigations have to play out. That is a familiar mantra.
Absolutely.
Zach Cohen, thanks for the reporting. Thanks so much. In a new interview, a former senior technical advisor to the January 6th committee, Denver Riggleman, says that the White House placed a phone call to a Capitol rioter on the day of the insurrection.
You get a real aha moment when you see that the White House switchboard had connected to a rioter's phone while it's happening.
Someone in the White House was calling one of the rioters while the riot was going on?
On January 6th, absolutely.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor, CNN legal analyst Jennifer Rogers. I'm curious the significance of this here, to have a communication, by the way, an outgoing call from the White House to a rioter, I believe, for a handful of seconds, but still a connection there. What significance do you see potentially? And again, I know that you don't have a lot of details, who placed the call and what was the content, but potential significance of that link.
Well, it would be, of course, a communication between the White House and the rioters, which suggests possible coordination. I mean, there's a lot we don't know, of course, who placed the call. They're going to have to do some detective work to figure out, if they can, who placed that call from inside the White House. But then you start to think about what coordination was there between people on the ground who were breaching the Capitol and the White House, and of course looking back to see whether there are other communications earlier in that day and the days preceding January 6th.
Okay, so the other new reporting from my colleague Zach Cohen we were just discussing, and that is text messages. We do know who was on both sides of those text messages, the then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Waldron, who was cooking up this plot to access voting machines in swing states. What is the legal significance or liability for Meadows to be aware of an attempt to access and perhaps interfere with voting machines?
So Mark Meadows has long been the kind of key to a potential cooperator who could blow this whole thing open, right? He's privy to what Trump knew. He's really the funnel kind of for information coming into the White House and going out from Trump to other people. So any pressure that could be put on Mark Meadows that puts him in jeopardy, that influences him to cooperate, is important. And this strikes me as something like that, right? Like, here's an instance where you have someone very deeply involved in these potentially illegal schemes to access voting information. And it's not just through Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and Mike Flynn and those folks, but directly to Mark Meadows. So that, to me, is a pressure point that you can use to say to Mark Meadows, listen, you need to come on board and cooperate and tell us what you know. And that, of course, could be a treasure trove.
I want to ask you big picture here, because this is the question I get most often from family and friends looking at these various investigations. But let's focus on January 6th, Wednesday, the last public hearing. We've had many public hearings, many important revelations. Question, of course, is now what happens with it, right? Will there be a criminal referral, for example? You spent years as a prosecutor. Do you see the evidence here? Have they made the case for a criminal referral for anyone up to and including the former president?
Well, certainly they've made the case for a referral, and in fact, we know that DOJ is already investigating parts of this plot, at least. So, to be honest, the referral isn't particularly important to DOJ. They're already looking at what's going on here. What is very important to DOJ is the evidence that has been amassed by the committee, and it's been very powerful and impressive. So they're already looking into this. There is substantial evidence of an illegal scheme. The question is, when they put it all together, will they charge or not in their discretion? And that's what we're all waiting to hear, of course.
The former president seems to be under the impression that if and when he announces his candidacy for 2024, that he is less likely to be indicted. Is that true?
No, not at all. I mean, if we got to within 60 days of an election, we know that the unwritten rule at DOJ is that they wouldn't bring a charge in that period. But just because you've been announced as a candidate doesn't mean that you won't be investigated. And indeed, if he really thought that were true, I think he would have announced already to put a stop to all of this. So I believe that he knows that that's not true. Certainly, Merrick Garland isn't paying any attention to that.
Jennifer Rogers, thanks so much.